You're listening to the Final Say Radio Show, a Rappaport media production, with your host Brett Rappaport and co-host John Rappaport.
In just a moment, we're going to have Mudar Zahran, who's joined us in the past. He's going to be joining us to discuss the ongoing issues between the areas in the West Bank and Gaza, the Arabs that are there, and the Israelis and the other people who are constantly having to deal with these particular issues. So without further ado, I want to introduce to the program Mudar Zahran. Mudar, first of all, it's a pleasure to have you back, and thank you so much for taking time. I know with the time zone differences between where you are and where we are, it's not always easy, and we do appreciate the fact that you make such a great effort to join us on the Final Say Radio Show, so thank you.
Thank you very much for having me at such difficult time for all of us.
It really is, and, really just, it breaks my heart to see so many people, especially the innocent people who are, I'm sure there's people on both sides who are a little more extreme or instigating in some way or whatnot, maybe more on one side than another. That's not what we're, I don't want to get into that at this very moment. But it's the innocent people who really have nothing to do with it, who are just trying to go about living their lives, who always seem to be the ones that pay the heaviest price. And that's where your heart really breaks, and my heart breaks, and the people who are listening to this program. And I guess if there's anything we could do, and I'm going to both services this weekend, and I'm just going to pray for peace, because I feel we could discuss this stuff, but we could also pray for it. And, it's all I can ask for. It's just a little bit of peace in the world. Mudar?
Absolutely. We can only hope that, honestly, at this moment, that there is a godly intervention for particularly the land of peace, the Holy Land that should have been a beacon of peace and tranquility to the rest of the world. Very sad time as a Jordanian Palestinian. What disturbs me the most about the latest attack is the fact that it took place in a religious ceremony in a synagogue where people were praying to God, the very same God we as Muslims, the Quran states that we, quote-unquote, worship the God of the children of Israel. That being the case, regardless be it any God or any religion, an attack on people during worship shows a very low point of morality, which, as a Jordanian and Palestinian heritage, forces me to think, basically, where do we stand at the moment as far as morality is concerned? Most of the listeners probably do not know that the worshippers in there were what the Israelis call Haredim, or the religious Jews, and those don't join the army. So the men who were killed yesterday, most of them probably never held a gun in his life. And it shows that they were the innocent of the innocent. It also puts us all at the point beyond prayers is this insanity cannot go on, and there must be a way out. We must be thinking of a quick solution at the moment.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct, and I agree with you there. Mudar, John has some questions for you, but I noticed something that caught my attention. I didn't know if you had any information on it. If you don't, I completely understand. But I've been following the flow of ISIS or ISIL or whatever we want to call them, and they've been using, they've been capturing oil reserves and refineries and different infrastructure that has been able to help finance some of the things that they're doing. But I recently read an article that some of the oil ISIS is delivering it to Jordan. And do you have any information on that? And do you think that changes any part of the dynamic between the United States, Israel, Jordan, and some of the other players?
Well, the game, it's very funny that whatever happens in the Middle East eventually ends up having negative outcomes in Israel, no matter where it happens. It's all connected. First of all, the oil, it has been confirmed by the CNN and that was exactly 3 months and a half ago, that Jordan is the largest oil importer of ISIS oil. They buy it at exactly 30% of the market value, and the volume of oil shipments is up to 2 million barrels a month at $40 discount, which is $40 a discounted price, $80 million a month go to ISIS through Jordan. You don't need to believe me on it. You can just Google CNN, and actually there's a YouTube video on the case. The second largest importer is Turkey. How does it all connect? Basically, Turkey and Jordan, despite all of those who paint a very mythological image of Jordan's king as a peaceful man who is moderate, through the course of this interview, I can show the audience how the king is everything but moderate and a nice guy. He's not. The game is both Turkey, Jordan, and a few other forces are playing this ISIS game. Both ends against the middle. Also, what's most alarming regarding what's happening in Jerusalem and the West Bank or Judea and Samaria, I could authoritatively confirm, with no conspiracy theories, that Jordan has an Abbas of the Palestinian Authority. They have a huge, huge role in what's happening, particularly in Jerusalem, because the more unrest there is in Jerusalem, the more they get prominence, the more they look like Abbas and the king as peacemakers, the more they look, and the more they keep their people busy hating Israel rather than hating them. So it's a very complicated situation, and the bad guys in this game are winning in all aspects.
Mudar, it's very interesting that you bring it up from that particular perspective, because that's actually the first area of questioning that I wanted to look at. And I apologize, I actually just left a meeting from on Capitol Hill, so it's a little challenging for me to find a very quiet place. But one of the things that I see is this entire problem going on right now. There's two underpinning issues that I wanted you to address. The first is, I believe there is an absolute willful, institutionalized level of incitement, particularly on the Palestinian Authority side, and Hamas is a different story. I mean, they're just hardcore terrorists. But the other side of it is the West. What we think of as the Western civilization's bulwark countries, including the U.S., many of which I think are actually rewarding terrorism because they're helping to, for example, calling for statehood long before you have any physical capacity, as we've discussed on prior shows, for it to be manifested on the ground. Almost seems like you're actually forcing what could potentially be a catalyst for lots of chaos and destruction. So I want to get your point on those two issues.
Well, first of all, as Jordanians and Palestinians in Jordan, we definitely welcome the stability and peace and prosperity of our brothers west of the river. Nonetheless, this could never materialize through the Palestinian Authority, which is corrupt, which is affiliated openly with terrorism, which has one of the largest governmental failures on record. So even if Israel was to pick up and say, take all of the West Bank tomorrow, it doesn't mean we're going to have a state. We're probably going to end up with something like Somalia or Yemen or even Libya. In addition, the whole push by the West, I have to be very exact and precise. I'm not trying to promote my own agenda, but I just have to call things by their own name. The exact Palestinian statehood, the Kerry peace plan, which was pushed by the beginning of this year up until today, the Kerry's peace plan, John Kerry's peace plan, that peace plan was, according to one of the largest Israeli newspapers, it reported that the peace plan was originally proposed to President Obama by Jordan's king in 2013. So it's basically Abdullah's plan, not Kerry's peace plan, which Abbas and Abdullah, Abbas is a Jordanian citizen, and he's basically in bed with the king on everything because they both share the same fate. They're both in the same boat. And so basically, since this idea has been promoted, the U.S. government is a large government. It's like a large ship. It's very hard to steer a large ship into an opposite direction. So they need a way to pull. They can't just pull out and say we can't achieve this. Also, Netanyahu's approach, he refused because whether you agree or disagree with the man, you cannot basically allow a state to your own enemies whose the PLO's chapter dictates the elimination of the state of Israel. So I cannot blame the man, whether I like him or not, but he refused, and basically the U.S., the powers that be in Washington, unfortunately some of the U.S. American Jewish powers to lobbyists are basically punishing Netanyahu by they keep hammering the statehood bid. In addition, the statehood, so-called statehood issue, I spent all summer in the West Bank, and I've spoken to a lot of people. I have an upcoming article for my interviews. I wasn't able to see a single Palestinian who seemed eager or interested about the statehood. It's just, it's fancy thinking, and it's basically the West is pushing Israel with it as if it's, the remedy that's going to solve all the problems. In fact, it's going to, provoke more problems. What statehood are we going to get under the Palestinian Authority, even if we get it? And which borders? And how many states are we going to get? A state in Gaza, and a state in Ramallah, in the West Bank, and possibly even a state in Jordan. If the king falls, when he falls, in my opinion, he will fall eventually. So it pops a lot of questions, and nobody seems to get a logical answer. It's a bad idea. The West is betting on the very wrong horse. Unfortunately, this project promoted by the Department of State, and history, unfortunately, has shown us that the Department of State doesn't usually make the best of options.
It's interesting when you look at I open this up with the incitement discussion because to me I think there's a big problem there. First, there's and I want to address 3 or 4 items related to this. I'll just sort of take them in order, and we'll just sort of pound through each one. So the first is the idea that if you have institutionalized incitement, I worry that you set up, especially when you have so many young Palestinians who have been educated by people who have essentially set up a narrative that can and will not occur. So I worry that you almost create a scenario where conflict is almost inevitable and to be sustained, because if you have this river to the sea mentality, which obviously would only happen after some great grand war, of which was so devastating nobody would even want to live there. How do you break that narrative? And the secondary question with that is, are there any, because I never have considered Abbas a partner for peace, who are the partners for peace? They're obviously hiding in plain sight if they're there. And how do we overcome this long time narrative so that we can actually sow the seeds of future peace whenever that may occur?
Well, being in a position of political leadership, I cannot afford to lie or simply give assumptions that are not true. In politics, you can get away with a lie, but not for too long, and we probably have seen that with the current administration in the United States. That being the case, we have to describe things as they are. The Palestinians in Gaza have had enough with Hamas. They would love to see Hamas go. I can say that authoritatively, and I have the documentation for everything I'm going to say here. The Palestinians in the West Bank, they basically are more radicals than any radicalism I've ever seen anywhere. I've been to hot places. I've been to the Gulf states. I've been to Egypt. I've spoken to Islamists in all of those countries. I have never seen more fundamentalist and more radical, anti-Jewish, anti-Western, anti-Christian, anti-anything different than my brothers and sisters in the West Bank. The new generation, 30 years and younger, are basically in their own world when it comes to radicalism and hatred for Israel. The older generation, which has not grown up under the institutionalized, well-financed and well-oiled machine of hatred by the Palestinian authorities, media, they're different. In fact, they are favorable of Israel. The younger generation is basically, you can't talk to them. There's no way actually out with them. I don't think there's any potential for them to establish peace. I have to say this: the main goals is to eliminate Israel and establish an Islamic state. Now, on the other hand, the Palestinians in Jordan, which no one speaks for us or about us, when in fact we represent 6.3 million Palestinians. That's more Palestinians than any Palestinian in any other country or Palestinians inside Israel combined. Or if you combine all Palestinians in Israel, even the ones with the Israeli passports, we number much more than all of them, and no one speaks for us. Those ones are completely, they hate Israel, but on the other hand, they're not willing to fight Israel, and there's enough U.S. Embassy Amman documentation about that they're not concerned with the so-called right of return. In my opinion, the only option that's forcing itself right now is the logical option of a Palestinian state east of the river. The only thing that's not Palestinian in Jordan is the king. People might call me crazy, people might call me, a dreamer, but my question to them, do you have any guarantees that the king of Jordan is never going to fall? With ISIS and all that's happening in the region, and Assad and all the trouble and infighting, and ISIS fighting in southern Jordan at the moment, could anyone guarantee that Jordan king is always going to be ruling that country forever? That being the situation, someday, sooner or later, the king is going to leave. Eventually he will, possibly sooner than later. And when that happens, there will be a Palestinian president in Amman, running a Palestinian government, and a Palestinian army, a Palestinian majority. And here, the question is always, how many states are we going to have? How many states are we going to have? 3 states, 4 states? What's next? The Palestinian state in Detroit or New Jersey? I can't even tell. But if anyone, I'm saying this openly, especially for those who oppose my solution, Jordan as a Palestinian state, it's either that they speak now or forever hold their peace. If anyone could offer an alternative solution that actually works, let him or her bring it now, or basically stop talking about delusions.
Now, we talked about the incitement issue, and you talked in the opening commentary about how sad it is to see what should be a beacon of respect for a higher being in whatever personal emphasis we want to place on that. So I want to go to what I think, if you look at it from a Jewish perspective, and this is something that transcends just Israeli Jews. I mean, Jews around the world have been arguably one of history's longest-lived victims of, literally, multi-millennia of blood libels. One of the great concerns that I have of what's going on right now, which I think could explode at any minute, and I think it's a pretty logical position to take, is that I think Abbas and many other of the Arab leaders around the world have been creating this new blood libel, based off Glick's hope that Jews would actually be able to also pray on the Temple Mount, to turn it into there's a plan to get rid of the mosque and all these other things. And I think the challenge there is we're very quickly seeing that the blood libel, like all of the other blood libels in history, becomes a catalyst and a trigger point. Do you see? And I go back to the way I posed the question about who are the rational leaders. Do you see people particularly in the Jerusalem proper, or in the Palestinian Authority, or anybody else around them, who understands that this is only going to guarantee a war and has no potential to in any way help the Palestinian people. Whether or not the Jews won or lost, it could only end in catastrophe for the Palestinians, it seems to me.
Well, I don't see the average person, the average 18, 19, 20-year-old in West Bank understanding this concept. It's beyond what they understand. This is not the United States or where there's a public conscience and people choose. Arab people have lived under dictatorships for thousands of years, and therefore they just follow what the leader says and not necessarily what he does. So basically, who is behind this incitement? The incitement was very and still is very well coordinated and orchestrated by the Jordanian government and the Palestinian Authority. The Jordanian TVs, many TV stations in Jordan, are fully watched and observed by Palestinians in the West Bank. And in fact, Jordanian news websites are most read in the Palestinian territories. And therefore, people follow the incitements. I mean, to the point where, for example, when you watch Jordanian TV, you see ads for stores and institutions and businesses inside the West Bank, because most of the viewers are West Bankers too. That being the case, there has been an institutional incitement, particularly about the Al-Aqsa or the Temple Mount from Jordan's side, which was very well facilitated by incredible documented incitement from the Palestinian Authority, particularly about the Al-Aqsa or the Temple Mount. And here's the question: if any of this was natural or normal or just a reaction, how come the West Bank did not go into an intifada when there was a war in Gaza and hundreds of Palestinians were dying every day during the war? How come it didn't happen? And now it happens while everything's calm. People need to understand, Jews and non-Jews listening to me, nothing has changed in Al-Aqsa. Nothing has changed in the Temple Mount. Jews and non-Jews who are non-Muslims can still enter Al-Aqsa up until 11 o'clock, and after that they cannot enter. And either way, they all are not allowed to pray unless they are Muslims. Nothing has changed. Why all of a sudden Jordan's King's TV is reporting, quote unquote, okay, Jews storming Al-Aqsa, settlers storming Al-Aqsa? I was reporting and tweeting about this like a month ago, actually more than that there's a strange tone in the Jordanian, particular Jordanian state TV. And all of a sudden, it started happening. If you want me to go further into the autopsy of what's happening, and I am a frequent visitor and prayer at Al-Aqsa Mosque, the people who are always garrisoned inside Al-Aqsa, they call them murabitin, people, usually most of them women, they never leave Al-Aqsa except for very few. Someone must be basically supporting and facilitating their stay for days and months inside Al-Aqsa. And those women and those men suddenly, out of nowhere, started attacking the Jewish visitors. I'm not saying arguing whether it's right or wrong. I'm arguing one thing: why now? This is all intentional, premeditated, and it serves the goals of regional powers, and it serves the goals of particularly Jordan's king and Abbas. Those two men, it's not in their interest to see any calm in Israel or any calm in the Palestinian areas, and it serves them to get into more trouble. And therefore, to answer your question, the average Palestinian in Ramallah or anywhere is irrelevant, because the powers that be directs them whatever they want to be. The only secular Palestinian bloc which with evidence of existence and influence is in Jordan. And again, I'm not as much pushing my agenda as much as I'm talking facts. If anyone has a better solution than a Palestinian Jordan and a Jewish Israel, they can step now and give us their opinion. I doubt anyone has any other solution.
I'm going to ask another question that'll have two components, and then I'm going to go quiet and pass you back to Brett. So there are what I will refer to as, at best, unhelpful actors, and I think I'm being generous here, and I'll sum them up very quickly. One, we have an Obama administration that is almost a participant in the problem, and so we have let's assume 2 more years of bad leadership in the U.S. And I find it ironic that he's actually united Jews left, right, and center in Israel at the same time he's dividing America, but I won't digress there. The second 2 characters, we have the EU, who seems to be rewarding poor behavior and efforts to move further away from peace, which will guarantee the opposite, but also the UN, who, as you know, funds the schools and the institutionalized hatred of Jews and of Israel and of the West and of Christians often is paid for and facilitated by UN organizations. So I wanted to get your opinion on that. And from a Palestinian perspective, if you look at the threat coming from Iran, do they not realize that, because it seems like Palestinians are often seeking Iranian support, but do they not realize that continuous ongoing threat to nuke Israel means they're gone in the same fire?
Well, again, the average person doesn't have any say in what's happening. For example, the King of Jordan has been courting the Islamists, and I mean, there's even more than that about his connection to ISIS, which I'm not going to get into right now. He doesn't care what happens, because him and Abbas, if the area burns, they're going to take their private Gulfstream jets and fly to London or Paris and retire with billions for the rest of their lives. Again, the value of a human being, the value of the public opinion in the Middle East is basically nothing, except in Israel. That being the case, we're not going to move forward in any logic. Basically, logic is not necessarily applicable to the Middle East. I have been warning for months from what's happening, and I basically mentioned in a public event just less than a month ago that we have very bad times ahead, and people protested my claim, and they choose to, even we have people like American Jews in the West, in particular in the U.S., who are supporting some of President Obama's policies on Palestine versus Israel. We have American Jews who are still supporting the king despite his anti-Semitic statements, which he has made lately, and statements about Al-Aqsa and other statements. And we still see support and blindness toward the whole situation. The bottom line is this is not going to go away quickly. And this time it's the real deal. It's not just an intifada. The last 2 intifadas, we didn't have ISIS next door. And now there is ISIS. There is an area, engulfed into fundamentalism and trouble. I hate to be so pessimistic. I see the seeds of World War III being implanted at this time. And we basically, I can say openly, we have given up the hope on the Department of State or the U.S. intelligence establishment communicating with us as secular Palestinian Jordanians. We have given up the hope on that. And now our only hope is that the new Congress would possibly listen to us about what we have to say, because we have warned from a lot of things years ago, and we've been warning, and many of them are materializing right now. Had we been listened to back in 2012, when we issued statements, one from another intifada, one from unrest in the West Bank, and one from many things that did materialize, had we been listened to, possibly wouldn't have the current situation, possibly would have not had the crazy peace plan which Kerry is promoting. With all due respect to Secretary Kerry, we would have not had possibly the war in Gaza. And it's either that there is a shift in policy. Also, the peace lovers in the U.S., the peace lovers within institutions like AIPAC, World Jewish Congress, they have to give us a hearing, listen to what we have to say, and realize that the game in the region has changed. The whole rules have changed, and we have an entire new set of rules.
Yeah, Mudar, I agree with a lot of what you just said, and I would add, you mentioned Kerry, that not just what happened in Gaza, but the actions of Hillary Clinton and John Kerry and of the overall administration have given rise to a lot of unnecessary trouble and trauma in the Middle East. Whether you look at Libya, the rise of ISIS, Iraq's borders completely breaking down, the ongoing civil war in Syria. I mean, we can go on all day with all the different issues that we're facing. And I always look at one thing that, because of the timing in particular, I think it benefits Iran. You mentioned regional players, but it certainly benefited Iran for Gaza to light up when it did with regards to the negotiation process and the timeline of their nuclear program negotiations. And, of course, right now with the deadline coming up, again, to have some sort of unrest in the West Bank or elsewhere takes the eyes of whether it be half of the eye of the America or the EU or whoever off of what's going on in Iran, where they can't just concentrate on the one issue. I think that has maybe a little bit to play. I wouldn't say it's everything.
It has everything to play. It has everything to play. Let me remind you of something I've tweeted at one point.
So you think it had a lot to do with that?
It's actually it's where it all started. After the Gaza war, the commander of the Iranian presidential guards went on television and said, "We will, quote unquote, militarize the West Bank." He said, out of the blue, we will militarize the West Bank. It was reported by all Arab media, including the major newspapers. I've tweeted it, and for some reason, no one caught that thing in either the Israeli media or the American media. And what we had just in less than a month, we had the West Bank in full swing with terrorist attacks, with stabbings, butchery, you name it. And they basically paid off. And they had, because unfortunately the U.S. administration doesn't show strength and doesn't show accountability to Arab dictators, we had both Abbas and Jordan's king openly, and I can say this authoritatively and I can prove it, and you can hold me responsible for saying that if you wish. Jordan and Abbas both connected to Iran through Assad's door. Both have connections to Assad, and they both have connections to Iran on this game. So this game is being played by 4 players. The players are, five players. The players are, first of all, Abbas and the King of Jordan, Iran, the godfather of the whole thing, Assad and Qatar. And none of the names are mentioned in here, I'm guessing. All I have documentation for. They are playing both ends against the middle. They are beating the Jewish-Israeli pinata to get more of what they want from the United States, knowing that the leadership, unfortunately, cuts them a lot of slack. Abbas would have never done what he did, say, during the Bush administration or even the Clinton administration. And nor would the King of Jordan have dared to basically stand face off to Israel during the Bush administration. This is very disappointing, and it's hurting all of us. And if it consists, I'm very concerned about the next 2 years. And allow me to make a plea here. We need, again, the Jordanian coalition of opposition. Allow me to abuse the show by, pushing an agenda here. We need to speak to the Congress. We need to be saved. We need to be saved because there's more trouble ahead. What you see is just the tip of the iceberg, and there's the train coming, which we need to avoid very quickly. If they manage to get the entire the country, the Israel as a whole, into an intifada, this is going to have consequences in all of the moderate camps this time.
And, this is interesting because I was looking at an article earlier today talking of the United Arab Emirates and the Saudis put together a list of 83 designated terrorist organizations on Saturday, which include Al-Qaeda, the Islamic State, but also a lot of the Muslim Brotherhood organizations, which are prominent in the United States. And, of course, that ties in Egypt. But I mentioned the UAE and Saudi Arabia because they don't necessarily align with the five that you just mentioned. And I think that it's very interesting. I think there's a lot. And let me go back to what you said earlier as we were going on this discussion. You mentioned that you believe, unfortunately, that you hate to be pessimistic, but that we're on the verge of a World War III. And I think John and I have been discussing this for years. We actually believe that it started years ago, and it's just been slow burning. The coals are heating up, and we don't have any leadership from the responsible countries that are making decisions that could stop it. In other words, forget Barack Obama; he's a useless cause. But who in Europe is making any sense? Are the Russians making it? Well, maybe the Russians are making more sense than anyone at this point. Who knows? But I think that's what's real troubling. And I think there's what creates a little trouble in my mind is because of the attacks on 9/11, where we know 15 of the attackers were Saudi nationals. There's a lot of distrust by the American people. And so it's a very difficult thing when you're looking for solutions or what countries in the Middle East you could look toward as an American to say, who could we speak with and work with to try to redirect this to something that's more peaceful and logical and try to resolve some of these issues. And I think it's very troublesome. And I agree with you. You say, there are people that need to be heard, and I agree with you. And I do think that the Congress would listen to you. I just don't think that this White House will.
Well,
I know it's a mouthful.
Well, we can only try, and in my opinion, we have, in my estimate, but I've given a lot of estimates on to TV and media, and most of them came out very accurate. But again, I think we have a good span of a year, maybe 12 months, to avoid at least a catastrophe along Israel's longest borders in Jordan. But on the other hand, just to show you how much there's connection between regional countries and what's happening in Israel today, the massacre 2 days ago at the synagogue was carried out by the Public Front for the Liberation of Palestine. That front is controlled by Assad. So it's not Islamic. They're eligibly seculars, leftist seculars. So they're not Islamic. They're not Hamas. They're not PLO. They are Assad's people. So even Assad managed to take a shot at Israel during these times, not fearing. What did he have to fear? If U.S. jets are flying in Syrian airspace to bomb ISIS, and they won't send the bomb to Assad, what does he have to fear? Really? Also, this is the thing when it comes to Iran. In 1982, when Israel launched an attack on Saddam's nuclear reactor, everyone called the action as barbaric, as bullyish, as wise guy style. It was basically an illegal act to fly into someone else's airspace and bomb the nuclear reactor. Nonetheless, this was in 1982. In 1990, Saddam became the West's public enemy number one. What would have happened if Saddam became who he became eventually when he had a nuclear reactor or nuclear power, or even worse, nuclear weapons? Today, if Israel was not under so much influence, possibly from Western forces and from the tolerance forces within the Western forces, possibly Israel could send a few of its airplanes and bomb Iran's nuclear reactors and call it a day. But it knows that this probably won't be tolerated by the U.S. administration. So it's this whole paralysis through analysis is going to cost the U.S. interest in our region a lot, and it's going to cost American and Israeli interest a lot. And as we saw, that Israelis usually pay with both blood and treasure for what someone else has done. And also my people, the two gentlemen, if I may call them that, being sarcastic, the two men who committed the massacre 2 days ago, where Palestinian young men who could have had their lives ahead of them and who had jobs, one of them working for the synagogue, if they were not so brainwashed, they could have lived and brought children and become lawyers, doctors, anything else other than martyrs and killers. So it's coming at a very huge price for all of us. And unless we move through the grassroots, through the Congress, through a very solid vision, possibly could be my agenda, the Jordan, Palestinian, Jordan, Jewish Israel agenda, could be any other agenda, whatever the agenda is. We need an out-of-the-box solution, and we need to work on it quickly. And this time, I'm warning for the last time, we don't have much time ahead. We don't have much time ahead, and we need to make use of whatever time we have.
Well, I was reading an interesting article about some of the teachers that work for the United Nations who are celebrating the death of these rabbis. And so I think that we could start the solution off by eliminating the United Nations from any of the discussions, and perhaps maybe we'll start to get somewhere. So I'll add that to the conversation. But Mudar, I want to thank you so much for taking so much time. And I know it's late there for you, so we do very much appreciate it. And John and I follow you on Twitter, and I'll share your handle so our listeners can as well. And that's at Mudar, that's MUDAR _ZAHRAN. That's Mudar Zahran. And I just thank you so much, as always. And we look forward to having you back. And John and I are going to be in Israel, it seems like just a few short months from now. And we're hoping that we'll have a chance to see you and be able to pick up some of these discussions that we've been having.
Thank you very much for having me, and God bless you all, and let's pray for peace in God's holy land, which might be soon. You never know. God bless.
Well, we could pray and certainly hope for it, and do what we do and discuss the issues each and every day, and we thank you for the work that you do. Thanks again, Mudar.
Thank you very much.
All right, take care.